The words came out without warning, sharper than any blade. "I wish you weren't here." A mother's most unthinkable confession to her own daughter, spoken in a moment that shattered their world forever. The daughter's face went pale, a heartbeat of silent horror before the world tilted out of place. In that instant, a family's fragile facade cracked, exposing secrets that had been hiding in plain sight, and a journey began, one that would reveal how much people can unleash in a single breath, and what it truly costs to say the unsayable. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Margaret, a woman whose life, to outsiders, looked like the picture of small-town stability. She worked part-time at the library, kept her garden in perfect rows, and was known for bringing pies to every church gathering. Her daughter, Emily, was 17, sharp-witted, stubborn, and unafraid to speak her mind. They had their differences like any mother and daughter, but nothing could have prepared Emily for what she saw that night, or for the words that followed. Now, the town was asking questions. Why would a mother look her only child in the eyes and say she wished she wouldn't survive? What could possibly drive someone to that point? Was Margaret hiding something so deep, so dangerous, that lashing out was the only way she could protect it? And what happened in the days after Emily walked out of that living room, leaving only the echo of those words behind? The answers would come, but not before unraveling a story that no one in this quiet town could have imagined. Margaret grew up in a home where appearances mattered more than anything else. Her parents were respected in their community, and the family name carried weight in their small Midwestern town. She was taught early on that a smile could hide the deepest worries, and that silence was often safer than truth. When she met Daniel, a quiet but ambitious man with a strong work ethic, she believed she had found her safe harbor. They married young, built a modest life, and in time, Emily came along, a bright, opinionated girl who filled their home with both laughter and challenge. Emily was never afraid to question the world around her, a trait that sometimes clashed with Margaret's ingrained habit of keeping the peace. Still, to anyone looking in, the family appeared flawless. There were holiday photos on the mantel, Margaret in her pressed dresses, Daniel with his arm draped protectively around her shoulders, and Emily grinning wide between them. Church picnics, school events, community fairs, they were always together, always smiling. But in the quiet moments, subtle cracks had begun to show. There were the lingering glances between Margaret and Daniel's closest friend, Robert, during neighborhood gatherings, fleeting enough to dismiss, but frequent enough that Daniel sometimes fell silent in mid-sentence. At the dinner table, the conversations grew shorter. Daniel had been working longer hours at the factory, sometimes double shifts, claiming it was for extra income to cover rising bills. Emily noticed the way her father's shoulders drooped more each evening, and the way her mother would stare out the kitchen window long after the dishes were done. The air in the house changed, becoming heavy with unspoken things. Arguments were rare, but the tension was constant, like a low hum in the walls. And though Margaret kept up her role as the perfect wife and mother in public, behind closed doors she was beginning to feel the weight of a life she had never truly chosen, and the quiet ache of wanting something more than the role she'd been handed. Emily, sharp-eyed and fiercely protective of her father, was starting to sense that the perfection she'd been shown her whole life might be an illusion, and she wasn't about to let it slip by unnoticed. It was a Thursday afternoon in late autumn, the kind of day when the sky hangs low and gray, pressing down on the streets until every sound feels muted. Margaret believed she was alone in the house. Daniel was at work on a late shift, and Emily was supposed to be at school until the evening, rehearsing for a debate competition. In the quiet, Margaret allowed herself the luxury of letting the kettle whistle, of setting 2 cups on the kitchen counter instead of 1. Robert arrived through the back door, the one no neighbor could see from the street. They spoke in low voices, laughter slipping out occasionally, the kind of laughter that sounds different when it carries a layer of secrecy. Upstairs, the curtains in the bedroom were drawn halfway, filtering the pale light into a soft glow. Margaret poured wine into glasses that still smelled faintly of detergent from the morning wash, and Robert touched her wrist in a way that lingered. It was a moment built on weeks, months, of crossing small lines until the distance between right and wrong no longer seemed so wide. Neither of them heard the front door open. Emily had come home early, her competition canceled, the bus dropping her off a full 2 hours ahead of schedule. She stepped into the hallway, dropping her backpack softly so as not to alert her mother. At first, she thought the voices upstairs were from the television, but as she climbed the steps, each word became clearer, each laugh sharper. She paused at the landing, her heartbeat hammering in her ears, and reached for the bedroom doorknob. In one motion, she pushed it open. Time seemed to slow. Her mother turned, startled, the glass of wine trembling in her hand. Robert stepped back, his face paling, the air between all three of them suddenly thick with shock. For a few seconds, there was nothing, no words, no movement, just the unbearable stillness of realization. Then Emily's voice broke through, shaking but fierce, demanding to know how long, demanding to know why. The questions came like blows, and Margaret, cornered and exposed, lashed out in a way she could never take back. Her voice rose, raw and unfiltered, carrying the words that would echo in Emily's mind for the rest of her life. "I wish you would just die, or that you had never been born." The silence that followed was colder than any winter wind. Emily's eyes filled, not with tears at first, but with disbelief. Then she turned, slammed the door so hard it rattled in its frame, and tore down the stairs. The front door banged shut behind her, leaving Margaret standing in the dim light, her own breath uneven, her hands shaking. She told herself she hadn't meant it. She told herself it was anger speaking, not truth. But somewhere deep down, she knew those words had crossed a line she could never retreat from. And what she didn't know yet, what neither of them knew, was that Emily wouldn't be coming home that night. But that night wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far darker. Hours passed after Emily stormed out of the house, and Margaret told herself she just needed time to cool off. She busied herself in the kitchen, scrubbing plates that were already clean, staring out the window at the darkening street, expecting to see her daughter's figure appear any moment. But the hours stretched into night, and the sound of Daniel's truck pulling into the driveway brought no comfort, only a rush of panic. Daniel stepped inside, weary from his shift, expecting the usual quick hug from Emily. When he realized she wasn't there, his brow furrowed. Margaret told him Emily had gone out, omitting the truth of their argument, hoping she'd return before Daniel started asking the kind of questions she couldn't answer. By morning, Emily's bed was still untouched. That was when Margaret's voice began to shake as she called friends and neighbors. Some claimed Emily had confided in them about feeling trapped at home, her independence stifled. Others hinted they'd seen Margaret in situations that didn't match her polished public image, lingering outside Robert's car late at night, her hand brushing his arm in a way no married woman's should. Daniel grew tense as these accounts reached him, his eyes searching Margaret's face for signs of a confession that never came. By the second day, the police were called, and a missing persons report was filed. Officers canvassed the neighborhood asking if anyone had seen Emily in the last 48 hours. One witness claimed they'd spotted a girl matching her description at a bus station on the edge of town, clutching a backpack and staring at the departure board. The lead seemed promising until surveillance footage revealed nothing conclusive. Just a blur of a figure in a hoodie, face turned away from the camera. Meanwhile, Margaret scrolled through Emily's social media, looking for any sign, any clue, and found a series of messages sent late at night to someone identified only by an unfamiliar username. The content was vague, almost cryptic, hinting at plans and fears she couldn't quite piece together. The police took screenshots and opened a digital trail, but every new piece of information seemed to lead to more uncertainty. The story began to spread, first in hushed whispers at the grocery store, then in bold headlines on local news. 17-year-old missing after family dispute. Reporters parked near the driveway, their cameras catching every time the front door opened. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and pitying glances, though Margaret could feel some of them watching her too closely, their sympathy mixed with suspicion. As the days passed, the questions multiplied, and the answers stayed out of reach, and Margaret began to realize that the real investigation wasn't just about where Emily had gone. It was about what had driven her to leave in the first place. It was on the 8th day of the search that the investigation took a turn no one had expected. Detective Harris, who had been leading the case quietly and methodically, returned from the station with a plain cardboard evidence box. Inside, wrapped in a worn sweater that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent, was a spiral-bound notebook with Emily's name scrawled in block letters across the front. Margaret recognized it instantly. It was the same journal she had bought her daughter months ago, telling her it might help her organize her thoughts for school debates. She had never imagined what kind of thoughts Emily would end up organizing within its pages. The first entries were harmless: homework lists, doodles, snippets of song lyrics. But as the dates advanced, the tone shifted. There were long paragraphs written in tight, slanted handwriting, detailing the silence at the dinner table, the way Margaret's eyes followed Robert when he was in the room, the late-night phone calls muffled behind a closed bedroom door. Emily wrote about Daniel's exhaustion, about how she felt like the only one seeing the cracks in the family's foundation. One entry, written in shaky ink, read, "I think she thinks I don't notice, but I do. I've seen them together when they thought no one was watching. I know what she's doing to Dad." Margaret's breath caught as Harris read that line aloud. Another entry described Emily following her mother one Saturday afternoon, watching from across the street as Margaret climbed into Robert's truck and disappeared for hours. Emily had written, "I'm keeping track. I don't know what I'll do with it yet, but I want proof." The detective's tone hardened as he explained that Emily had also documented their last few conversations, each one colder than the last. The final entry was dated the very day she vanished. It was only 3 sentences. "Today I'm going to tell her I know. I'm scared, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Whatever happens after, at least I won't be pretending." When Margaret learned the police had this journal in their possession, a sharp panic settled in her chest. It was no longer just a matter of finding her daughter. Now the investigation held a record of every suspicion, every accusation, in Emily's own words. She imagined the entries being read aloud in court, each one stripping away the image she had spent years cultivating. She imagined Daniel hearing them, the betrayal in his eyes deepening with every page. That fear became reality weeks later when the first hearing began. By then the case had captured more than local attention. State news outlets were covering it daily, and people were choosing sides based on little more than speculation and rumor. In the courtroom, the journal was presented as evidence. Pages were read aloud in a voice steady enough to make the words sound heavier than they already were. The public learned of Emily's months of quiet surveillance, of her certainty that Margaret's affair with Robert had been ongoing long before the night she caught them. They heard about the tension, the distance, the growing resentment, and finally, the confrontation that ended in those infamous words. Under oath, Margaret admitted to the confrontation but insisted she had spoken in anger, not in truth. She said she had been humiliated, cornered, and reacted in the worst way possible. But the damage was done. The jurors' faces gave nothing away, yet the gallery was alive with whispers. To the world, Margaret was no longer the quiet woman from the library. She was the mother who had been caught betraying her husband and had told her only child she wished she'd never been born. And as the gavel struck to adjourn for the day, Margaret felt the walls closing in, not just from the law, but from the truth she had been running from for far too long. It was nearly 3 months after Emily's disappearance when the front porch light flickered on just after midnight. Daniel, now sleeping in the guest room, was the first to hear the knock. Soft at first, then urgent. When he opened the door, Emily stood there. She was thinner, paler, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes carried a heaviness he had never seen before. Margaret appeared in the hallway, frozen in place, unable to move toward her daughter. For a long moment, no one spoke. Emily stepped inside slowly, as though crossing the threshold felt like stepping into another life. She told them she hadn't been kidnapped, hadn't been forced away. She had left because she no longer felt safe. Not in a physical sense, but in the kind of safety that comes from trust, from believing that the people who love you will never use your worst pain as a weapon. She explained that in the days leading up to the confrontation, she had already been struggling under the weight of what she knew. And now, sitting at the kitchen table, she dropped the final truth she had been holding back. The man she had caught her mother with that night, Robert, wasn't a stranger at all. He was her father's best friend, a man who had been at every birthday party, every Christmas dinner, a man Daniel trusted like a brother. The words landed like a blow. Daniel's face drained of color. In the weeks after Emily left, he had wondered if the affair was just a fleeting mistake, a moment of weakness. But hearing Robert's name ended any hope of that. The betrayal was layered now, not just in his marriage, but in the friendship that had been the backbone of his adult life. Daniel pushed back from the table without a word, leaving the house before dawn, and by the end of the week, he had filed for divorce. The fallout spread quickly. Their tight-knit circle of friends fractured overnight. Some sided with Daniel, others simply stepped away, unwilling to be caught in the mess. Margaret's phone stopped ringing. Invitations stopped coming. At the grocery store, people avoided eye contact. The house grew quieter by the day, the laughter and warmth that once filled it, replaced by the faint hum of an empty refrigerator and the sound of the wind pressing against the windows. One by one, the framed photographs on the walls came down. Family portraits, holiday snapshots, the smiling faces of people who no longer spoke to each other. In the end, Margaret was alone in the living room on a rainy afternoon, staring at the bare spaces where the photos had hung. Her voice was low, almost to herself, but the words carried the weight of everything that had happened. You can lose everything with just one sentence. And I did. In the quiet that followed, with Emily gone to stay with Daniel and the divorce papers already in motion, Margaret found herself replaying that night over and over. The way Emily's face had changed when the words left her mouth, the silence that swallowed the room, the sound of the door slamming. She wondered if there was any version of their lives where she could have taken those words back before they cut so deep, any version where she had paused long enough to choose restraint over rage. Do you think a single moment of anger can erase years of love? Or is there a line that, once crossed, can never be undone? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, because this story has left more questions than answers. And if you think this story was shocking, wait until you hear about the man who vanished on his wedding night, leaving only a note on the altar. Subscribe now so you won't miss it, and be here when we uncover a case that will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and the lengths people will go to hide the truth.